Did St. Thomas Aquinas teach sola scriptura, or even hint at the truth of the doctrine? My answer to this question is not confused or hastily concluded. St. Thomas Aquinas does not uphold the scriptures as the sole rule of faith, or the sole infallible rule of faith. Although St. Thomas does bring forth much honor and privilege to Holy Writ, he does not go so far as to strip the Church of her gifts that protect her from error. There is a trend among modern Protestant apologetics to take a sentence from St. Thomas or the Fathers that bring forth a very high view of Scripture and claim victory. But the question is not on Holy Writ's authority as a rule of faith or its ability to contain truth, but the Church's role to uphold what God has revealed. Instead of placing private judgment above the Church as Protestants do, we place the Church above private judgment as something that can bind you to a certain proposition drawn from Revelation. Now, before we prove that our view is what St. Thomas brought forth in his writings, we shall disprove a quote in the commentary of John 21, paragraph 656, which states, "Now John states that his gospel is true, and he speaks in the person of the entire church which received it. My mouth will utter truth," Proverbs 8:7. We should note that although many have written about Catholic truth, there is a difference among them. Those who wrote the canonical scriptures, such as the evangelists and the apostles and the like, so constantly and firmly affirm this truth that it cannot be doubted. Thus John says, "We know that his testimony is true. If anyone preaching to you a gospel contrary to that which you received, let him be accursed." The reason for this is that only the canonical scriptures are the standard of truth. The others have set forth this truth, but in such a way that they do not want to be believed except in those things in which they say what is true. This is brought forth to prove St. Thomas actually taught sola scriptura. First, we must note that the context of the statement, "the canonical scriptures are the only standard of truth," or faith, is based on his comparison between Holy Writ and those who have written about Catholic truth. For everyone would agree that Holy Writ, compared with other writings, is the only thing that is the standard of truth. Even when comparing it to the Church, the way in which it brings forth truth is distinct. While one reveals truth, the other proposes faithfully what Scripture puts forth. This next quotation explains this exact fact. He states, "The truth of the faith is contained in Holy Writ, diffusely under various modes of expression, and sometimes obscurely, so that in order to gather the truth of the faith from Holy Writ, one needs long study and practice, which are unattainable by all those who require to know the truth of faith, many of whom have no time for study, being busy with other affairs. And so it was necessary to gather together a clear summary of the sayings of Holy Writ, to be proposed to the belief of all. This indeed was no addition to Holy Writ, but something taken from it." St. Thomas Aquinas, second part of the second part of Summa Theologica, question 1, article 9. He is clearly establishing with this reply that the Church gathers together the claims of Holy Writ and proposes the proper understanding of it, clearly establishing the Scripture's role and the Church's. But does he hold that the Church is an infallible rule? Yes. He states, "The reason of this is that the species of every habit depends on the formal aspect of the object, without which the species of the habit cannot remain. Now the formal object of faith is the first truth, as manifested in Holy Writ, and the teaching of the Church, which proceeds from the first truth. Consequently, whoever does not adhere as to an infallible and divine rule to the teaching of the Church, which proceeds from the first truth manifested in Holy Writ, has not the habit of faith, but holds that which is of faith, otherwise than by faith. Even so, it is evident that a man whose mind holds a conclusion without knowing how it is proved has not scientific knowledge, but merely an opinion about it. Now it is manifest that he who adheres to the teaching of the Church as to an infallible rule assents to whatever the Church teaches. Otherwise, if, of the things taught by the Church, he holds what he chooses to hold and rejects what he chooses to reject, he no longer adheres to the teaching of the Church as an infallible rule, but to his own will. Hence, it is evident that a heretic who obstinately disbelieves one article of faith is not prepared to follow the teaching of the Church in all things. But if he is not obstinate, he is no longer in heresy, but only in error. Therefore, it is clear that such a heretic with regard to one article has no faith in the other articles, but only a kind of opinion in accordance with his own will. St. Thomas Aquinas, second part of the second part, the Summa Theologica, question 5, article 3. There seems to be a clear affirmation of the uniqueness and high regard of Holy Writ, while also affirming the role of the Church as an infallible rule, going so far as to say such a heretic with regard to one article has no faith in other articles, but only a kind of opinion in accordance with his own will. There is one other quote people bring forth to establish a hint of sola scriptura in St. Thomas Aquinas. It states, "Nevertheless, sacred doctrine makes use of these authorities as extrinsic and probable arguments, but properly uses the authority of the canonical scriptures as the incontrovertible proof, and the authority of the doctors of the Church as one that may properly be used, yet merely as probable. For our faith rests upon the revelation made to the apostles and prophets who wrote the canonical books, and not the revelations, if any such there are, made to other doctors." Summa Theologica, first part, the nature and extent of sacred doctrine, question 1, article 8. This in no way proves that Holy Writ is the sole rule of faith within St. Thomas's thought. For we previously have shown, and therefore know, he holds the Church to be an infallible and divine rule to the teaching of the Church, which proceeds from the first truth manifested in Holy Writ. But within this quote, we also see that he is discussing what confidence we should put on Holy Writ in comparison to the doctors of the Church. Of course, we should have more confidence within divine revelation than within any other thought or writing, for the revelation of God is the fount from which all doctrine pours forth. But with the evidence presented and explained, it is clear that none of St. Thomas's words proclaim the authority of divine revelation to the negation of the authority of the Holy Catholic Church.